Hello everyone, it's been a couple of videos since I've addressed you all directly with a ramble, but yeah, it's the season to live life, and that season came a little bit earlier this year, but I'm back talking to you all directly for a little while. It'll come in bursts. I'll talk to you directly like this, and then go out, film things, and post them, and try to spread it out so I don't fill your subscriptions feed with just spam from me. But in a couple days, I'm going to tell a story for my 7-year anniversary for this channel here on YouTube. So look out for that because I'm going to reveal one of my sock accounts from another platform because it's a very interesting story. So stay tuned for that. But for now, I'm going to talk about something that crossed my mind a lot the past few days because we've had this abnormally warm winter, right? It's almost like we only had half a winter, and for the past few weeks it was so warm. There was like the hottest day ever recorded in February, and it was like 80 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what that translates to in Celsius for all of you international folk, but it was fucking warm for February, right? And my seasonal allergies have come early and will probably last for a very long time this year. The tulips in my front yard started to sprout, and the bulbs were just about ready to open. And then in the last 2 days, a freeze came through. You know, so I imagine there's a lot of crops that are getting ruined by being confused by the abnormally warm weather that we had for such a long period. I mean, there's green in the grass in my front yard. That's not supposed to be that way on March 8th. You know, this is one of the winter months, but there's a lot of people and a lot of things that are going to be affected by this climate change, and going forward as it gets worse. There are some people who are going to be hurt more than others. And so, since I work with homeless populations a lot, I've been thinking about them and how climate change is going to hit them a little bit harder. And the first thing that comes to mind when I think about this is that there's going to be more homeless people. And why? By choice. By choice. A good portion of the homeless people that I have worked with, they just enjoy not being tethered to a home, and they've learned to live with the situation, and they're just fine being homeless. And as the climate gets warmer all around, it's going to be more of an option to people. If you look at the difference between the concentration of homeless around Denver and Colorado Springs and the concentration of homeless around, say, Albuquerque or Phoenix or LA, there's a lot more homeless people there because the winters aren't as harsh. Here in Denver, we used to have long bouts of freezing weather that people would freeze to death if they were outside. But in the future, that might not be the case. We might not get any freezing days a couple of years from now. So, my feeling is that when you look to cities either higher in altitude than Denver or more north than Denver, you see communities built around protecting themselves and each other from the cold. The cold is a common enemy that they all gather around and fight. And so The threat of becoming homeless in a community that's got a long period of freezing in it, that's a death sentence. Versus in other parts of the continent, you could just go camping for a couple years if you had to, and you could, you know, just sleep out under the stars almost every night of the year. So, yeah, I feel like climate change and overall warming of the planet is going to result in more and more areas on the planet where it's a viable option to become homeless and not have the looming specter of frozen death, hanging over your head. So there's going to be more homeless people because it's going to be an option, right? And so there's going to be uh, a little bit more pollution in the world in places where they previously were not used to litter and people disrespecting common public places. The tragedy of the commons, um, and people not wanting to have uh, any any sort of rules about them. So they will try to create communities like occupying, uh, like the protests, but occupying like public parks and creating shanty towns because, you know, rampant homelessness is going to also come with poverty, and it's going to be a mess. It's going to be a mess. This is what I'm foreseeing. Um, Places that used to be able to just count on there being a lack of homeless people to take advantage of all of the open spaces and amenities that they created for the public will now be inundated with people who think, oh, well, we can now live there and we can take advantage of all those things. And oh, it's for the public, well, then we can all use it for whatever we wanted to use it for. And just completely disregard the fact that they're taking public places and making them places that the public that are paying for those places to be public don't want to use anymore. And as the homeless start congregating around large cities, there's going to be an effect of voting out big businesses and corporations. And by that I mean uh, they're going to need services. They're going to need a lot of food, and they're going to need a lot to clean up after them and whatnot. Um, these services that come from the city and the state are going to be paid for by taxes. And so, what's around that can pay for the taxes when there's going to be a large portion of the community that aren't contributing to the tax coffers but are consuming a lot of the resources? Well, it's going to be the businesses. And as they raise taxes, those businesses will start leaving those places. Um, it'll just make sense for them to leave. Rich people who don't want to pay for all of the new squatters are going to just leave. There's going to be a rich people flight from all of the city centers. But there's going to be worse things that come with this. The biological effects of climate change on Mother Nature, uh, with regards to homelessness, is going to be massive. The first thing that I can think of that's just going to be it's going to be a nightmare is as these homeless uh, bands of people across the country start making communities without regard to um, codes and how to live, and they want to live underneath the stars and whatnot. Their shanty towns are basically made like the first two buildings and the three little pigs. You're made of straw, made of wood, right? Um, Storms are kind of going to come, and these storms are going to be bigger than any of the hurricanes that we've ever seen, right? They're going to be massive. They're going to be fed by those warm waters in the Atlantic, and they're going to pummel the country. And as they tear through uh, larger swaths of land than have ever been destroyed by anything before, and as they spin off tornadoes from these hurricanes, because that's how fucking big they're going to be, they're just going to destroy so much that is not well secured, and hardened against those things. And so these homeless are going to be uh, vastly disproportionately affected by this. And also flooding in places that you never seen it before, or flooding that's supposed to be once every 100 years or once every 1,000 years is going to become once every 3 years. You know, there's going to be large amounts of people that can't afford to be swept away, and then return to try to rebuild and then get swept away again. This is going to be a very big problem. Um, Sea level rising is going to drive away a lot of people from the coastlines, and especially Florida, where there's a lot of people who are just going to pack up their trailer and try to move it somewhere else, and bring that culture with them. Uh, in California, there's going to be massive droughts, um, and heat waves. The heat waves that used to kill people, um, in the tens to hundreds, are going to start killing people in the thousands to 10,000s every freaking heat wave, you know? Um, and it's going to affect the people who are outside more than the people that have a way to fight against these heat waves and have water. Um, the plant cycles, just like my tulips in the front yard, are going to create food shortages when they're interrupted. You know, um, so being poor and homeless is not going to be uh, something where you can be choosy when food does come your way. It's good. There's going to be a food shortage when a freeze can come randomly through and kill off all the crops. Parasites, holy shit. The reason why we have no West Nile virus here in Denver, or very little of it in Colorado, is because it freezes. And so the mosquitoes just don't kind of get, the ones that carry the West Nile virus, they don't get up to where we are. But we're going to have a lot more cases of that if we don't have freezing weather. We're going to have bed bugs, just horrible infestations of bed bugs amongst the homeless that are sleeping in huddled masses in city parks. Rats. Holy shit, they're not going to have to hibernate. They're not going to have to find a cellar to crawl into for the winter. They're just going to be able to live out in the fields year round. Probably have 3 or 4 more breeding cycles in a year. The rats are going to be horrible. Lice. Ugh. Fleas everywhere. It's going to be horrible. Um, Tularemia. This is something that I gathered from my friend Lucky Dog 1351. A couple of years ago, he shot and killed a rabbit. And he was cleaning that rabbit in order to eat it, and he got exposed to tularemia. It's also known as rabbit fever. And he was sick for about 3 weeks. He actually looked in the second week as if he was going to die. And it was like the worst influenza symptoms you ever seen in a person. He lost a lot of weight in 3 weeks, before it finally broke, and he had to have antibiotics and medicines from the doctor to help him through that. It's a deadly thing. It can kill you. And the way that it lives in rabbits, there's a season that you're supposed to kill and eat rabbits. And that season happens right after a freeze that's long enough to kill the tularemia inside of them. So the rabbits' bellies are close to the snow and the freezing ground, and it takes a good freeze to make the rabbits not have enough of the tularemia in them to be passed on to humans after you clean and cook them. Without that freeze, without that season where the tularemia dies, rabbits will be off limits. You won't be able to eat them, you know. And there's going to be a lot of game that poor homeless people might be willing to try because, they're hungry and it's there. Why wouldn't I kill that rabbit? There's going to be a lot of those things that will now become deadly to them. And I just foresee a lot more hazards with a shorter frozen season and a much longer summer than you would get if we were to be able to maintain the status quo with the length of winter and summer. You'd get maybe a little less frostbite. You wouldn't hear stories of homeless people losing their toes because they got caught outside and couldn't get a bed in the shelter. You might get less influenza during flu season. But other than that, there's a whole world of horrible things that can happen to the homeless if we keep warming, and that's the trend. And yeah, I just foresee a lot of bleak days in the future as we deal with climate change and homelessness.